Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Motorcycle Rescue and Review. Today, I am with my favorite retro bike of all time, Kawasaki's ZRX1200R. And the ZRX was introduced in 1999 as the ZRX1100. It made right around 100 horsepower at the rear wheel, and just what a fantastic bike. Just the build quality, everything about it was just really nice. Very entertaining power plant, the gearing was just right, and the torque of that motor just made that a super fun bike to ride. The first time I rode a ZRX 1100, I stopped by a used car dealership. One had been traded in on a used car. At the time I was riding a ZX9, and my problem on the sport bikes was I was driving just way too fast all the time. It was a little bit dangerous. That's the only way I was comfortable. That's the only way it was fun. And so when I rode the ZRX the first time, I was laughing like the entire time I rode the bike, just because of how torquey it was. It would loft the front wheel easily, and it just had so much power where you ride it normally, not way up in the rev range, but really from about 2800 RPM on up, it just pulled hard. Probably one of the most entertaining bikes that I had ridden up to that point, and I instantly fell in love, and I ended up actually purchasing that bike from the dealership. The interesting thing on the ZRX was it was about 20 years ahead of its time. At the time, in '99, when it was introduced, what was selling better were things that looked more modern. Not the throwback stuff, not the retro motorcycles that are so popular today. And so I honestly think if Kawasaki did another, they could, honestly, this bike is old enough now. In 5 years, this is going to be an antique. It's a 2002, it's 20 years old. But it looks fantastic, and even by today's standards, I think it's styled as well as, or better than, any of the retro bikes that are out today. And it would really look good on Kawasaki's showroom floor, especially now, we have the 50th anniversary of Kawasaki, and they're introducing limited edition bikes that have the red paint, the silver and blue, and then the gold Kawasaki emblems. I was just in the Kawasaki shop yesterday and saw a Kawasaki Z650 in this livery, the red, this blue and silver, and the gold. And it looked fantastic. And this bike would look at home sitting right next to it. I think the thing I love most about the Kawasaki ZRX is the way that it really captures the look of the 1980s superbikes, the early 80s superbikes, specifically the GPZs. And not only that, but it combines those looks with real performance. It's got fully adjustable suspension in the front. It's got massive 6-piston calipers in the front. It's got sporting rubber. It's got the sporting tire sizes on it. And so it's really as if I took one of those bikes from the early 80s and I updated it with modern suspension and the tire sizes and everything. And this bike is really what I would end up with. And then it's got a 1200cc motor that just in stock trim, it already makes 115 horsepower at the rear wheel, which is far more, and far more torque. It makes like 80 foot-pounds of torque. It's just far better than what I could do reliably on the old 80s super bikes. And so for a whole lot less money, I can buy one of these, and it's my dream bike. It's a bike from the 80s that's built to go fast and to do it reliably and comfortable, and just looks great, but I can buy it for a whole lot less money than I could recreate it from an actual 80s bike. In contrast to, let's say you compare this bike, the ZRX1200, to a much more modern bike, as in Honda's CB1100. The differences are astounding. The CB1100 is a solid performer engine-wise. It's not bad, but it has bargain basement shocks, it has bargain basement brakes, it's got bargain basement shocks in the back as well. It's non-adjustable, and as soon as you try to ride that bike quickly, it very quickly starts to pogo. Like I say, it shudders under braking, and just the performance is not up to spec. So if I bought a CB1100 and wanted to kind of bring it up to my standards, I'd have to do a lot of work to it right off the bat. And the difference is, you know, you just look at the quality of components that Kawasaki used on this bike. It's amazing. It's such a high quality piece. And, you know, I think that's why it's such a good looking bike as well. Already, this has become a more modern classic bike. The prices of these things are going up pretty significantly, and it's becoming collectible. The people who ride them know they're just fantastic. They're fantastic fun. And even by today's standards, the performance that they pack is significant. It was never the fastest bike in the world, you know, even at its introduction, but that was never what it was designed to do. But after all these years, what's it like to ride? Has my memory kind of made it all sunshine and roses, and do I remember it more fondly than I should? Or is this really still a solid performing bike? Let me gear up, I'll bring the camera along, let's ride.
I am currently riding Kawasaki's 2002 ZRX1200R. And man, this bike is a trip down memory lane for me. It's just one of my favorite bikes of all times. I think at this point I've owned 4 of them, and I've just got a lot of great memories riding the ZRXs. My first one was a 99 ZRX1200. It had a Two Brothers pipe on it, and it was just beautiful. It was the Eddie Lawson replica colors, and that's really where I fell in love with the ZRX. And what strikes me right away is how compact this riding position is. It's a 1200cc bike, but the bike itself, the dimensions, it really feels small. The bars aren't overly wide, they're somewhat fairly closely spaced, and gives it a nice sporty feel. The seating position for me is just very comfortable. Right now I'm in 5th gear and the motor is just spinning along with very, very little vibration. The instrumentation on this is pretty comprehensive. It's all analog, but it's got the fuel gauge, the tach, the speedo, and although I wouldn't mind a gear indicator, it really doesn't need a whole lot else. Oh yeah. In a relatively small bike like this, the 80 foot-pounds of torque is just monstrous. And I've had this, the ZRX, at the same time I had an 1100XX Honda Blackbird, and you would, even though the Blackbird was the fastest bike in the world at the time, you would definitely think that the ZRX was faster, because really below 6,000 RPM the ZRX made so much more power and so much more torque, and it would just leave, on a tighter back road, it would just leave the Honda for dead. That and the shorter wheelbase of the ZRX allowed it to handle far more nimbly. It's one of the few bikes that I've ever had a set of tires worn out from edge to edge completely because of the way I was able to ride the ZRX in the corners. Now, I haven't been on one in several years, so I'm just kind of getting to know this bike again. It's a cool day, and I just put a brand new tire on yesterday, so I'm not going to be riding this super hard right now. I'm going to be getting to know the bike again and getting the feel for it. But drive out of corners is just, it's shockingly good. Brakes are also just mighty impressive. And really, without even spinning the motor up way up in the rev range, this bike just generates serious speed when you want it to. Another aspect of the ZRX that just really would surprise most people who are used to some of today's fuel injected bikes, the carburation on this bike is perfect. There are no flat spots, it's easy to drive, it's super smooth from idle to redline, and one of the best carbureted bikes to ever leave the factory. Even when this bike is cold, it just takes a little bit of choke and a couple of minutes, and it warms up very quickly to the point where there's no, as soon as you get out on the road, there's no hunting, no popping. It just takes off right away, ready to ride. With the torque that this bike makes, revving it out to the rev limiter is just, it's pointless. You know, even shifting at 6,000 RPM, it's just wickedly fast. Now this bike currently has the stock exhaust on it, and I'm actually going to, I've got an ART slip-on for it that I will put on here because I think this bike deserves a little bit of attitude in the way that it sounds. And all my other ZRXs had exhausts on them, and I really like the way they sound with an exhaust. So I'll do a video on installing that, and then the before and after sound as well. Even if you're used to riding modern bikes and you would hop on this bike, you could easily be forgiven for thinking this bike was brand new. It has an excellent shifting 5-speed transmission. The brakes, like I say, they're monstrous. The motor on this bike is based on the motor that came from Kawasaki ZX11. And in the ZX11 trim, it made about 135 horse at the rear wheel. And in this bike, it makes about 115 horsepower at the rear wheel. But it makes significantly more torque and significantly lower in the rev range. And so, again, when you go to real world riding, you know, pulling out of corners, just anytime you accelerate from a speed where you're not, you know, over 6,000 RPM, this bike just eats up a lot. It just eats up faster bikes. So we'll play around a little bit on the corners here, just kind of see how it feels through a set of twisties. Surf that wave of torque out of the corners. The suspension is well controlled and taut. It's not I wouldn't call it a super plush ride. Compared to something like my Versys 1000, this rides a lot tighter. It's sporting and well controlled. Brakes have very good initial bite. As soon as I hit them, it starts to stop. Bike feels very solid. It's not transitioning, it's not porpoising front to back as I get on the throttle or on the brakes. Yeah, very well controlled, very nice. The nice thing about this bike right now, I'm just tooling down through and not really hitting it hard, and this bike is very smooth, very compliant. It's not herky-jerky, and it's not pressuring me to go fast, so I can just enjoy these back roads. I can enjoy, even if I'm riding with a group of guys that have slower bikes, the cruisers, I can go riding with them and enjoy that. Or I can go and ride with friends that have sport bikes and enjoy riding a little bit more aggressively up in the mountains. And the thing I like about bikes of this genre is you can go slow on them comfortably, just like you can on a cruiser. But if you have a situation that arises where you need to really hit the brakes, or you need some acceleration to get out of somebody's way, or you need to swerve to avoid something in the road, it has that performance, it has that capability that a cruiser just does not have. And if you can ride one of these responsibly, I honestly think they're safer than a lot of your cruisers. They have better brakes, better handling, more suspension, and more power when you need it. But that's my 2 cents. Yeah, if you're doing 55, you don't have to downshift to pass people with authority. This bike just, 80 foot-pounds of torque is so much on a motorcycle. Lots of fun. I'll do just a quick run up through the gears. The first gear was definitely not pegged. It will easily loft the front wheel in first, and in most gears if you come up over any kind of rise. It's interesting riding this bike again after all these years, and I remember the joy of riding this after riding sport bikes for quite a few years, and just it allowed me to just enjoy the simple pleasure of going down through the countryside at the speed limit and having fun and enjoying the ride and not being kind of angry because my wrists hurt or upset with slow traffic. And that's really the interesting thing, is nowadays there are so many options available in this performance standard category that it doesn't shine quite as brightly as it's shown before. But as far as looks goes and everything else, and still the performance, man, even today this thing is just a wickedly fast bike. And you know, if you're riding even with people with Ninja 1000s or the Suzuki GSX-S 1000, this bike is going to be right there with them. It really comes down to rider skill. It's still a very easy bike to ride. The only thing that I notice on this is the brakes are not necessarily super progressive in the way they have so much initial bite that it's almost a little bit on-off instead of a smooth progression onto the brakes. And I prefer something that's a little bit more of a smooth progression, but it's a matter of just getting used to it. And I would say it's just right at low speeds where I notice it, right, you know, 5-10 miles an hour when I go to hit the brakes. It's, like I say, it's just not, it's a little bit on-off. But that's really my only critique. I always wish that the ZRX had a 6th gear, and you know, riding this one, this is one with the stock gearing, and this is 1200, so it's got the taller gearing. I don't mind it. I don't mind the 5-speed. If I were doing highway work, I'm sure I would wish for a 6th gear, but this really isn't a highway bike. It doesn't offer much wind protection, you know, a little bit, but I think this is adequate for the type of bike that it is.
All right, that was fun. It's fun to kind of go down memory lane on a bike that you've owned before. The first time I rode one of these, the retro standard really wasn't a thing. The retro performance standard did not exist. This was the first of those bikes. It was such a revelation to me at the time, and I just really enjoyed it. And right now, there's so many of the performance standards out there. The Suzuki GSXS, the Ninja 1000, Honda's CB 1000. So they're available, and I've ridden those bikes, and they're good. They're all nice machines. I would say performance-wise, really, if you would ride this and ride a GSXS 1000 or a Ninja 1000 back-to-back, or the Z1000, this bike is so close to those still, performance-wise, that there's really not a difference. If you had one of these in the garage, you'd still be able to keep up with your buddies with those other bikes. So performance-wise, it really is still an amazing performer. It's not as shocking as it was when it first came out and the first time I rode one of them. I am going to, on the type of bike like this, I want that sound. I want a little bit more tone, and so I'm going to go ahead and put an exhaust on this, and I think that'll make me smile even more. But this bike is it's timeless. It really is beautiful. It's beautiful today. It was I thought the GPZs were great looking when they were introduced in the early 80s, and this bike is just, to my mind, it is the prettiest retro bike that has ever been introduced. I just think it's gorgeous. The only other bike that kind of comes close in my brain is the new Kawasaki Z900RS Cafe, and I want to ride one of those in the worst way. I think they're just a really cool looking bike, and I really like those, but I haven't ridden one yet. I'll just throw this out there, if you are local to the central Pennsylvania area and you have a Z900RS Cafe and you feel like loaning it to me for a review or a back-to-back head-to-head comparison with a ZRX1200, that would be awesome. You can contact me at johnsmotorcycle@hotmail.com and let me know. Well, I'd love to know if there's anybody else out there who loves a ZRX1200. Let me know your thoughts below. I hope you found this video entertaining and informative, and until next time, enjoy the ride.